Welcome to The Spawn Chunks, episode number 351 for Monday, May 26th, 2025. This is a podcast all about Minecraft, available across all your major podcast platforms, including the video version that goes out on Spotify and YouTube. If you're enjoying the show, consider subscribing wherever you're listening to this. My name is Johnny, but the internet knows me as Pixelriffs, and joining me, as always, is a freshly assembled Joel Duggan. Hi, Joel.
I am newly assembled, kind of like the new Avengers. I went to go see Thunderbolts on the weekend. And if you want to hear more about the assembly of the new Avengers, as well as the assembly of Johnny's new studio setup, then you should check out the Render Distance. That's the extended version of the podcast. You can get it at patreon.com/thespawnchunks. So people that support the podcast get an extra 20 to 30 minutes of podcast every single week. Sometimes we talk about behind the scenes stuff. Sometimes we talk about what we've been doing on the weekend. Other times, very often in the post show, we get into an extended Minecraft conversation. So you get a little bit of everything in the Render Distance. So once again, that's patreon.com/thespawnchunks. Something else that's a benefit to the people that are members of our community is that they get to hang out with us once a month in the Minecraft Hangout and talk about what they've been building in Minecraft. That's usually the same as the login that Johnny and I do every week, but instead it's with our patrons and what they've been building in Minecraft or anticipating building as we get closer and closer to the Happy Ghast coming into the game. There's also a quarterly hangout where Johnny and I go over the numbers, the YouTube downloads, the Spotify views, that kind of stuff. So if you're interested in the behind the scenes, you also get one of those once a quarter. And again, that's patreon.com/thespawnchunks.
So speaking of assembly, what have you been assembling this week on the Citadel?
So for me, I've been spending quite a bit of time in 1.21.5. I am now up to date for the next couple weeks until they update to 1.21.6. So hopefully that transition will not be quite as laborious as this one. I had to replace a couple of mods that were not supported anymore. There was a couple of mod libraries that just took a little bit of time, and we don't have a lot of gameplay mods on the server. It's really more about some quality of life stuff, and there were some conflicts, and I've talked at length about Tables and Chairs 2, the data pack, and so I won't get into any of that. But I got to the point where I'm now on the to-do list for West Hill, where I need to update to 1.21.5 because I wanted access to firefly bushes, short dry grass, tall dry grass, bushes, all the new stuff. And so that's what I did for the first part of the week. I updated the server. I went on a little bit of an exploration mission to kind of grab all the things and bring them back to West Hill to then make more. And it was a really enjoyable experience. I really just had to go to West Hill and just head north until I hit new chunks. And then I immediately started to see things like leaf litter. I think the last thing on my list was wildflowers. They were a little bit harder to find. But I saw most of the new mobs. I think the only thing I didn't see in game was the new cold weather chicken, which is ironically my favorite of the chickens. But I saw everything else and really liked the way that they blended in and worked together. Really enjoy seeing the firefly bushes along the rivers and in swamps and stuff naturally in game. They really add a lot. I think it was cool. I really did not anticipate fallen trees to be as cool to walk by naturally.
It's the same.
In game.
Like, I found that myself. Like, I genuinely, the first time I saw a fallen tree, I was like, oh, that's actually kind of cool. And I didn't think it was going to have that much impact, considering that you can do that yourself with just a handful of logs and maybe a mushroom or two.
Yeah, and the fact that they put vines on them is really cool. Like, it really makes them feel like they've been there a while. Like, it's a little touch, something that you and I would do in our builds anyway, to kind of make a build feel like it's been around for a while.
Yeah.
But that to me was one of the things that was super cool. And then when I got back to West Hill, I immediately started farming these things and trying to find a way to kind of make more. Now, leaf litter, I will say, even if you have a lot of leaves lying around, you'd need a really big furnace array to get leaf litter quickly. If you know where some is, I think the exploration is where you might dump some time. But if you find some, it is way faster to just walk around and collect it, because something I did not anticipate was when you pick up leaf litter, you get between 3 and 4 for every block that you break, because as it places down, just like wildflowers or pink petals, a full block of leaf litter is 4. So you get 4 when you pick up. So I walked around the forest thinking like, I'm going to run around here for a couple of minutes. I'll maybe get a stack or 2. And I ended up with like 5 stacks of leaf litter. I won't use that quickly in the immediate future. So I'm all set there. I didn't have to smelt any of it. And then with wildflowers, it was very easy. Like, I also got a stack quite quickly, but then I made myself a couple more stacks with bone meal back at the basement, kind of location for updating things. And then the ones that were tricky were the bush and the dry grass, because they spread in like a cross pattern. And so I just kind of put on my redstone hat brain and thought like, okay, what could be the easiest way to do this? And ultimately all I did was, because the basement is stone, I just placed the bush on a single grass block with one other grass block that it could grow onto. There's no other way for it to go. So it was always going to grow in the same place. I just hooked up an observer clock to a dispenser with bone meal and basically did like an alternating like left click, right click with placing or shearing something. And then having to either bone meal it myself, or there was a thing that I had to do, like I had to replace it, or there was a way that I had to like make sure that I wasn't destroying what was there, that I was using the shears for it. And it took a little while. I think, oh, you know what it was? It was growing short dry grass into tall dry grass to have as a separate stack. So that involved like the left click, right click, but everything else, it was very similar to like a dye farm or a too tall flower thing. Although I did find it odd, like as an experiencing game, I knew about it because we do this show, but I don't know that I would necessarily intuitively expect bushes and dry grass to act like that, because the firefly bush doesn't. The firefly bush acts just like a too tall flower. You bone meal it and one of them pops out. So like getting extra of those was dead simple. Like when I realized in the wild that that's all it took, I brought back a half dozen and then just turned it into 2 stacks just with a couple stacks of bone meal. So I do find it counterintuitive how they operate. So I don't know why they did that. It's a little bit strange to me. But I am looking forward to doing some more landscaping now that I have those. I think they're going to look really good along the spruce river with the firefly bushes. I briefly lined up the firefly bush with my custom wheat texture, the tall grass texture, the tall dry grass texture, and the short dry grass texture. And it really looks like stages of wheat growth. So with that kind of gradient, you can sort of, do the things that we've been talking about on the show for a couple of weeks now, which is like freezing crops in a certain stage. Well, now with dry grass and tall dry grass, you can sort of do that. I don't know how it looks up against the vanilla wheat texture, because I haven't looked at that in a very long time. But with my custom golden wheat texture, which is very similar to tall dry grass in terms of color, it looks really, really cool. So I'm looking forward to messing around with that. And then I went around and I lit up the quarter, the dark kind of like taiga biome quarter that I had, and was able to use the bushes, because again, in there, I had a lot of berry bushes and I had a lot of ferns. And so it got repetitive after a while. So every once in a while, when I had like 2 or 3 berry bushes, I would just swap one out for a regular bush, and the regular bush changes with your biome color. So like when you're in a taiga, it doesn't stay that bright green that it would be in another biome. And so it looks like a berry bush, again, that has grown up but not yet had fruit. And so it's a great kind of in between. So there's really some good use cases for these if you want to go through them and start messing around. So I'm looking forward to that, because the rest of the week was just spent with small tasks. I had shorter streams, so I was going through my West Hill book and saying like, put some paintings up in the stairwell, decorate that room that's empty on the back, like just little things like that. I'll have lots of screenshots in the show notes this week, but there's really not a lot to kind of phone home about. Like I put up a couple paintings. I did a little bit of stuff in there. Most of the early part of the week was exploring and looking for these new things. And because I updated to 1.21.5, I replaced the Shulker Plus mod, which is no longer supported. And I replaced it with one that I will highly recommend for people if you're interested in doing this, is labeled Shulker boxes. So this is a quality of life mod. We'll have a link in the show notes. And it just allows you to take a block texture or an item texture and affix it to the top of a Shulker box. So instead of having to remember what's in it or naming it and just having that alone, you can have like, for me, I've got 3 white Shulker boxes in my ender chest. One of them is iron, one of them is rockets, and the other one is all my tools. Pickaxes, axes, and stuff. And so I'm able to put something on the top of each one of those. And rather than having to remember exactly where they are, which is not awful because I tend to leave them in the same space in the ender chest. I think you and I do the same sort of thing in terms of our organization. Yeah. But when you start moving them around in the world in a build, and unless you put them down exactly the same place every time, which is what I've been doing, it becomes difficult. So if you're trying to quickly do something, and you're like, well, which white box do I want to grab my stuff from? And it ends up being very jarring visually, both as a player and I think as a viewer too, if you're watching content, with someone that knows what they're doing, quickly going from shulker box to shulker box, looking for something. It's very kind of disruptive visually. And so this way, I can look at like all of my wood shulker boxes, some of which are brown, and go like, that's oak, that's spruce, and that's dark oak, because I put a hanging sign of each wood type on the top of every wood box. And it's less problematic when you're going to mangrove or acacia, because those are in red or orange shulker boxes. But I also have an orange shulker box for terracotta. I've got a red shulker box for redstone. So if I'm using mangrove and redstone at the same build, I want to be able to know which one is which. So it's a small change in terms of it doesn't really affect any gameplay. You can't place more blocks, but I find it just makes me so much faster and I feel so much more organized. There's less mind share trying to figure out where your stuff is, which I really like. And a big improvement over the Shulker Plus mod is that the Shulker Plus mod, when you put a block texture on the shulker box, it stuck out like a button or farther, almost like a mini block or a head, Minecraft head on a block. And I found that very off-putting. It made your shulker boxes almost look like not vases, but like your pots, you know, like the clay pots that we have in the game now.
Yeah.
And so with this though, it doesn't matter whether it's a block or an item, they're flat. In the same way that an item is flat up against the wall in a picture, in an item frame, same idea. And so the cool thing about that is that you have a much wider range of things that you can put on top. The only drawback is that it uses the side texture. So if you put a stair down, you'll get that L shape. You know, if you put a fence down, you'll see like the cross section of the fence. The downside is you can't use trapdoors, or you can, but like they're not that appealing visually because you get the edge of the trapdoor when the most distinctive side of the trapdoor is the top, right? So there's kind of some push and shove there, but for the most part, it works out really well because like your grass block is that Minecraft, you know, grass block dirt with the grass on the side, not the top texture, which if you put the top texture next to moss, it's going to look really, really similar, but the side of the grass block is more distinct. So I found it really, really helpful. I've got some more screenshots in the show notes this week to show people what it looks like. And if you're interested, if you're running a Fabric modded server, or I think there's versions available as well in other mod packs, or not mod packs, but mod launchers, but labeled shulker boxes. We'll have a link in the show notes.
Nice. Well, I'm glad you're finally on 121.5, and I'm happy that you found mods that are at least like lining up with the stuff that you had previously. I think while obviously these frequent like incremental updates are going to be difficult for modders to keep up with in terms of like the speed at which they're being released, I think it's also really good for players to know whose mods are going to stay updated with the current releases, right? Like if you want to be moving your server forward, you want to have a group of mods where the developers are actively working on moving forward with the new versions as well. So once you can get that dialed in and sort of weed out the projects that are no longer maintained as thoroughly, I think it means a better quality of life for players and server admins in general.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that the pain point over the last couple of drops has been the changes to how data packs work, the changes to how some texture packs work, and resource packs rather. And then some of the mods, in one case, I've got a falling leaf mod that I don't even know if I need anymore because there's falling leaves in vanilla Minecraft now. So like there's a couple of things where like you're kind of dialing it back and deciding what you want to keep. But for the most part, I think I've got it down to mods that are going to stay on top of things, especially when I looked at like the frequency, when I know 1.21.5 dropped, early April, end of March, something like that. And then I can see like when, like you look through back the versions, like, oh, this updated like 2 days later. Like that is an update scheduled. And it's like, sweet, that's not going to be a bottleneck. So I don't think going from 0.5 to 0.6 is going to be much of a problem. I think that it's just going to be incremental, and I'm just going to have to wait, just a little bit. But honestly, these days the server's been pretty quiet. I'm usually the only one online, and so there's no one else on the server just like champing at the bit for Happy Ghasts. So I think we should be good for like a week or so, once it drops.
Sure. Yeah. And looking forward to getting into the Happy Ghast stuff. We have a couple of like emails and things about that a little later, along with vibrant visuals, which I think is going to be one of the things that maybe, as you've seen data packs trip up people who are working on quality of life mods and stuff, I have a feeling that the refactoring of rendering is also going to slow down people who are used to resource packs, especially since now they're going to have to consider, am I making a resource pack just for vanilla graphics, just for default like lighting and everything, or am I also making a resource pack that's compatible with vibrant visuals? That's going to be like double the work for some of the people who make resource packs, although I imagine people have been tinkering with that stuff on the side anyway. Some people will want to develop stuff so it looks good with Minecraft RTX for Bedrock or shaders for Java, so maybe we'll see people adapt to that workflow a little more keenly in future.
So what have you been up to in Minecraft this week?
Well, Skeleton Wolf attempts are now at 830. Still no Skeleton Wolf mount on Misadventures. I'm probably going to hit 900 next stream, which will be tomorrow on Tuesday. So, yeah, it's still going. It's still going strong. And in the side, I have now gotten more than enough budget to buy the big area of land that I wanted to get hold of. That happened, I think, early last week. And I'm now heading for something like 100,000 coins on the server. So after I bought the land, if there's any like extra areas, like a bridge that I want to build to a nearby area or something, I can probably claim like little bits here and there as well. So in the meantime, I've actually been playing Minecraft through CraftMine, which is just as bizarre a way to play Minecraft as you could ever hope for. And this still continues to pitch me curveballs in a very interesting way. So I'll have a new episode of that out this week. I have finally completed the challenge mine that requires you to defeat waves of skeletons. This was the original one that kind of tripped me up when I didn't realize that they were a thing to begin with. And I've tried to go back a couple of times, but not accounted for the fact that it doesn't give you any food and there's no mobs that spawn in this cave environment. It's basically like a desert cave. And so you don't really have many options. But now I start with 5 golden apples each time I load a level, so I at least had something to work with, some regeneration from those. They're not great for saturation, so I was just trying to run around as little as possible and strategize a bit more, and that worked out in my favor. It got really difficult in terms of the amount of mobs it expected you to handle. The first wave is something like 10 skeletons, and then it's like 20 wither skeletons, and then it's a mix of regular skeletons and wither skeletons for a third and final wave. And I was like holding myself up in a cave and trying to snipe all of them from a distance because the shield blocking is also replaced with something else. There's like a shield bash that you can do, but it doesn't really block arrows particularly effectively. And with a minimal amount of food, I couldn't just heal through the damage all the time. So that was potentially a little dicey. But the cool thing about defeating one of those challenge mines is that it gives you a key that opens up one of the shimmering, semi-transparent doors that are in the area, and that seems to lead through this labyrinth of differently themed rooms. So last time I mentioned this on the show, I opened up one that has an entire end ship in there, which doesn't have any rewards or anything as far as I can tell, but does have like a couple more doors that lead through to different areas. And after that, I've led through to a sort of crossroads room that has barrels in the floor. And from there, I unlocked another door that led to a room that's actually got invisible walls in there, but it's kind of like the scrolling texture that you have in the end portal, that kind of parallax scrolling where it looks the same regardless of what angle you're looking at it from. They've done that, but with this like falling green text matrix style background that uses the enchantment font to make it very Minecraft. But like once you step in there, you can't see where the floor, ceiling, or walls are, and so you have to kind of either do it by feel and think, okay, well, it's allowing me to walk 3 steps forward and my character's like walking animation and the footstep sounds are still working, so which way can I go from here? Have I like missed a turning and I need to go back 1 step? You can kind of feel it out that way. Or alternatively, you can go into third person, and that gives you a little bit more of an idea of like when your character is obscured by a wall or going belly up to an obstacle in front of you. And that does lead through to another door. And so I'm kind of curious if it's just going to get harder and harder to progress, and it's going to be more and more like a puzzle environment. So I'm thinking I'll give it at least one more attempt and see if I can build up some more of these keys that I can use to open the doors. And from there, I'm not certain what the end game is, but the challenges have continued. The first one I beat was this kind of platforming puzzle where you had a series of snowy islands that you could bridge to using snow blocks, or find other ways, or play skyblock because it gave you like a lava bucket and a water bucket. There was the skeleton one. The one after the skeletons was it said something like the Enderman, and it was like that Enderman in particular, and it was like the Skeleton Wave survival, but it just gave me one Enderman with a glowing effect, and I was rolling my eyes going, okay, is this Enderman going to be like super powerful, or is it going to like spawn a bunch of other stuff, and are there going to be multiple waves of this? You kill the Enderman, the level ends, and that was it. It was just a troll the whole time, and I was like, oh, you guys, like they've got some really like goofy setting expectations and subverting them, like little puzzles like that. But now, yeah, the only thing I'm butting up against with Craft Mine is the fact that the amount of items I've unlocked from the skill tree means that I start every level with a full inventory, and the first thing I have to do is a bunch of inventory management to put away the, like, potion brewing kit that it's given me that's obviously, like, a brewing stand and about 12 ingredients. And so I start with a bundle now, so I've been bundling all of that immediately and throwing out whatever's in the bundle, which is sometimes, like, a cake or something like that. And then from there, I've started, like, streamlining my setup. I usually put on a water-breathing helmet and, you know, some boots that let me jump faster and that kind of thing. So there's a few little bits and pieces, like a little setup routine. Then the game throws me into a world that has a mandatory condition that spawns lit TNT near you every so often, and so suddenly I can't do inventory management because if I stand still for too long, it blows me up. And so, yeah, there have been a couple of things like that, yeah, they're just doing some wacky stuff with it, and some of the levels now, because I don't really need XP, I've unlocked that much of the skill tree at this point, I've mostly been clearing the levels and getting out as soon as possible, so that I can get back to those challenge rooms faster. And it's much more about, like, finding whatever the next challenge is than going through the regular levels at this point. I'm still having fun with it, and it remains to be seen whether it will continue to be fun if this labyrinth just goes on forever, but yeah, I will have my best crack at it, and then hopefully by June I will have finished playing the April Fool's update.
I was always really good at mazes when I was a kid, like those craft books and exercise books and any kind of thing in school. Mazes, top down, pretty straightforward. I was pretty good at them when they started to get into video games, like when you had to like be in the maze from a first person perspective. But when you can't see the walls and it's just a matter of trial and error and to like knowing when you're going to go left and right, that to me I think would be frustrating as a player. But the visuals sound cool, like in terms of like the Matrix style text and stuff like that. I'm curious though, like when you're in these runs, like does it run more like a roguelike? Like if you don't make it through the level or you don't make it through the challenge room, do you start all the way back at the beginning, or do you start like at the maze room?
I mean, the maze is a separate part of it. That kind of branches out from the hub part of the world, which is different from the levels that you're entering to like do the roguelike portion of it. So when you're in the hub world, the only things you have there are the XP that you gain from leaving. You get a world with like an enchantment glow on it that either indicates whether you succeeded or failed when you were there. And if you've killed mobs, they give you trophy items that are like little Funko Pop style things almost that you can kind of put around and decorate with. But aside from that, there aren't really many other things you do in the hub besides take these keys that you get from the challenge mines, open up the doors and see what's beyond them. And there don't seem to be any like other rewards there. It's just a progression thing. So yeah, I'm curious what they're doing with the environment of that, and if there's anything else to it, I will find out soon. But for now, yeah, the all of the item management and stuff happens in the individual like Minecraft world levels that you go to from the hub, so that's a separate part of it. But the roguelike aspect of it is fun. It's definitely not what I would want regular Minecraft to be. I miss building at this point. It's the main thing that I haven't really had a chance to do much of, but still tinkering on creative ideas behind the scenes, so hopefully I'll have some building to talk about soon.
Nice. I do remember one maze. I think it might have been Tango on Hermitcraft, but it had something to do with the player height in the block. And so there was no jumping allowed in the maze, or the roof was so low that you weren't able to jump. And you had to walk around this empty room, and essentially something under the floor was blocking you that you couldn't see. And so the maze path was laid out by like these blocks were unobstructed where the other ones were. Yeah. And it was just like, because the roof was so low, the height difference from one thing to the nether, you wouldn't be able to go up over it, but you couldn't see visually what was going on. Mm-hmm. And so it sounds very similar to that.
Yeah, you could do that with like carpets on top of fence posts or walls or something, right? If like the room is 2 blocks high, but then there's a fence post under a carpet, you've got like a 1.5 block hitbox that you can't
Right.
walk up onto. Yeah, so there's
Right,
some
that
smart
makes
stuff
sense.
you can do with Minecraft mechanics, and I think what they're doing with this is like a lot of very clever retexturing of blocks that are the same texture regardless of which angle you look at them, but it makes for a very disorienting experience. We're going to move on into the news. This week, we've got a new Snapshot for Java edition to talk about. This is Snapshot 25W21A, which was published Tuesday, May 20th. The new features of this one are an update to the patterns of clouds in the sky, and that horses, donkeys, and mules can now be fed carrots to heal, grow, and improve their temper, in addition to the foods that they already had. In music and sound news, there is a new sound effect for when a lead snaps, and there are new custom sounds for shearing saddles, horse armor, and carpets from llamas. The technical changes this week are the datapack version is now 78, which includes additional tweaks to the experimental dialogues feature that was added last week, and the resource pack version is now 62, which adds support for the lead and the llama equipment sound effects. Some fixed bugs in 25W21A include an old one, which, if you clicked on the statistics button on the menu screen, it advanced the game by 1 tick. That's now been fixed, along with a couple of fixes to old and new rendering issues for beacon beams. Minecarts causing memory usage increases and crashes has now been fixed, along with a couple of fixes for the music toasts that were added last week as well, including one issue where they flashed in the pause menu if the music slider was set to 0, and the new composer Amos Roddy's name has now been added to the credits. There are a bunch of other fixed bugs and technical changes, the full details of which can be found in the Minecraft.net changelog, linked in our show notes at thespawnchunks.com.
Making the Happy Ghast is a 4-minute behind-the-scenes featurette showcasing the development of the Happy Ghast, discussing highlights and challenges of designing the new flying mount for Minecraft, and that's available on the Minecraft YouTube channel. Features Agnes Larson and a few other developers talking about all the different ways that they approach the Happy Ghast. I thought it was a fun little watch, so if you're curious about the behind-the-scenes on that, I would recommend going to check that out.
Yeah, I definitely need to check that video out. I haven't watched it yet, and one of the things I really enjoy when they add new features like this is getting a bit more behind-the-scenes info. Is there anything you'd want to highlight from what they mentioned in that video?
Well, as you might expect, they were heavily inspired by hot air balloons. The idea of being able to get up above your build, look at it from a different perspective. They knew they couldn't have it be similar to the Elytra. They needed to differentiate it in a way. And so one of the things that's great about Elytra is the speed at which you can travel and the ease at which you can travel. But one of the things that's a drawback with the Elytra, if you're trying to use it to look down at one of your builds, you kind of have to look real fast because it's going to go right by, as you're flying around. And so with this, you're able to fly around, obviously, on the Happy Ghast and look down, pause in the air, like it'll stay still for you. So that was one of the things. But the interesting thing for me was that they knew because of the hot air balloon inspiration, they wanted to put something under the Happy Ghast. And at some point, they arrived at boats as a way to do that. And then they thought, okay, well, we could leash a boat to the Happy Ghast. And the idea of leashing boats or hanging something from a Happy Ghast is what led to the change to leash mechanics and leashing something to everything asterisk other mobs that are allowed to be leashed. So the leash mechanics didn't come first. The Happy Ghast came first. And then the desire to put something under the Happy Ghast from hanging from it is what led to the new leash mechanics. And I thought that was pretty cool. They didn't go into this update thinking we need both leash updates and Ghast updates. It was the Ghast update led to the discussion about the leashes, which I thought was cool because that's not where you would think it would come from. You would think it would come from some other motivation, right?
Yeah, and I think that's also something they've done more recently is be more agile with reacting to both player demand and also features that they think would be cool. Like they don't mind diving into old mechanics and revising stuff if it's going to make it more robust long term. I think this is a slightly different example, but think about how initially the plan with the creaking was to have it despawn whenever the sun rose no matter what, and they weren't able to be name tagged because name tags would not make them persistent. And then a couple of updates after their initial release, they've been possible to make persistent because of the amount players wanted to use them in minigames and for redstone eye trackers and things like that. And that's something else to mention. Tango from Hermitcraft, like you said earlier, I think he's now working on a new kind of puzzle box game that relies on that as a mechanic, and that's only possible because you can name tag creakings and make them persistent during the day. So I think it's great that there are there is a move towards the development team trying to keep that stuff in mind and thinking, well, what are people really going to want to use this for, and how we can facilitate that instead of, just coming back to it a few updates down the line.
Yeah. So we got a pretty light snapshot. Like, what do you think of the minor changes that are happening?
I think the cloud patterns and stuff seem fun. I think there's a creeper face that appears in them occasionally.
I saw that too.
I've seen a couple of things like that. I've seen a few people give feedback on the clouds that maybe they should, maybe in later versions, if they're still looking at stuff like this, be more layered, so there could be optionally different levels of cloud height. Maybe if you want to turn on fancy or fabulous clouds, you can have a bit more dynamic realism to that, because clouds in real life, while there's often one height at which you see clouds, there are often layers as well, and so it can feel a bit more realistic that way to have different clouds even moving in different directions or something. But I think this all just seems like refinement to me, which indicates that the release versions of this are not too far away. I'm expecting them probably sometime towards the end of June. And that's really good news, because I want to get my hands on the Happy Ghast in the survival guide world as soon as possible. I've done so many builds that are related to floating things or flying. I have this entire city planned around the use of wind charges that Happy Ghast would be a fantastic addition to. And I think there's going to be a lot of fun players will have with that update once it arrives. So here's hoping it arrives sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I think we're going to be seeing release candidates and pre-releases soon. We'll reverse that order, but you know what I mean. I feel like we're going to start to see that stuff soon, because typically there's a Minecraft release somewhere around the end of the school year, in June. So that's only 4 weeks away. So I would imagine to get through a couple of pre-releases and a couple of release candidates, we might even see something as early as tomorrow. I don't know. But I'm looking forward to that coming in. And I like the idea, actually, that you mentioned about layering the clouds. The only thing that I would be curious about would be if we added extra layers to the clouds. I think one of those layers would have to be not affected by sunlight. So right now with the shader pack that I've been using, when a cloud goes in front of the sun, the light dims. And if there was layers of clouds, then there's a potential for the sun to always have a cloud in front of it. Even though in our world, that wouldn't necessarily affect the sun as dramatically, but in a video game world like Minecraft, it might be a little bit more intense. So, I'd rather have one affect the sun or cast a shadow and the other not. Or something that I think would be fantastic, given the new world height that we have with Minecraft. I say new, since 118. I would love to see a cumulonimbus cloud, the great big tall ones that you see people taking pictures of from airplanes. And when someone looks at a storm or a tornado or something way off in the distance in a flat area like Kansas or the prairies in Canada, it would be really cool to be able to fly by that in Minecraft. I think the only drawback would be, what is that experience if you fly through it? Does your visibility go to 0, right? That's going to be disastrous if you fly into a mountain or something. So if there was a way for it to be like a fog and not completely blind you, but to be able to fly by something at scale like that, I think would really take clouds in Minecraft to the next level. Because right now, most of the time you're flying underneath them. If you get above them, then it's fine. But if you fly through them, it only takes a second. Then you're on the other side. So I think it would be really cool to see what you could do with better depth to the cloud. So not necessarily more layers, but having some different types. I took some geology and weather courses in university, and the different kinds of clouds and the clouds that exist at certain altitudes and not others, and why. It's all really interesting stuff. And there could be even some Minecraft education in there too. If you're teaching people about weather systems or whatever, then using Minecraft to do that could be really fun.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's a lot to be had. And they have said recently that they're not completely against the idea of changing weather effects in the game now, because they've been working on atmospheric fog for when it rains and things like that. So maybe there's a little bit of that stuff, especially with how a lot of the recent minor updates have focused on immersive details, like the amount of foliage in the world changing. Maybe they're looking at a bit more weather stuff now as well. It'd be interesting to see if that's in the pipeline. For now, we're going to get on into our chunk mail for the week. We have a couple of listener emails and a final one that's going to spur the main discussion for this week. So first of all, if you'd like to email the show, the listener email address is spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. Write to that address if you've got a question you want answered or a discussion that you would like to propose for the show. Keep your emails short and to the point if you can, because it really helps them include them in the show more easily. Joel is going to kick us off with this first one.
First email is from Donaraff, a community miner in our community. The ghastly ladder problem. As someone who needs to trim a very large, very long hedge nose, trimming the top of it can take a long time. Moving the ladder is similar to how Joel was mentioning repositioning the ghast could get equally painful. Since you can entice ghasts with snowballs, do you envision Mojang implementing a snowball on a stick? I feel it would be equally apropos and ridiculous. Looking forward to your thoughts. Donaraff plummeted to his doom after clipping through the ghast while he was trying to reposition it with new fishing pole attachments.
Well, speaking as somebody who does have a medium-sized hedge, I think I would honestly love to have a Happy Ghast to fly around my hedge on. It would be a lot more convenient for me than using the ladder would, although a lot of things I think would be more convenient in Minecraft terms. So yes, I can relate, I can sympathize. I still do not have enough hands-on experience using the Happy Ghast for building. I have not done a great deal of Snapshot gameplay that wasn't just acquiring the Happy Ghast in the first place and then doing a little bit of flying around with the hot air balloon boat attachment, but I haven't used them for building a whole bunch yet, and I don't know that many people that have. ZloyXP was talking to me about a build project he's been working on them, and he had pretty good feedback about it. He said it was honestly a pretty positive experience building with them, but I'll wait to see what he puts out in his video about it to see if there's more there than his initial summary of it. But I think the Happy Ghast to me is more like movable scaffolding. Obviously, scaffolding has its controversies in the Minecraft space. Like, I think I find it a lot more usable than some other folks do. People are often complaining about falling off it or the fact that it doesn't let you bridge out as far as other blocks do. I think some folks just don't get on with it, but I think the Happy Ghast is going to be another solution to that. It's going to involve less like building from the ground up and creating scaffolding towers to have some kind of support for yourself. And I think the problem is just going to be you've only got more or less a 3x3 area you can walk around in before you need to move that over. And I think that's Donaraff's point here is the difficulty in constantly making minor adjustments and moving around like that if you want to build on such a broad scale.
Yeah, I haven't tested it personally, but the issues that I can see happening are things like wanting to build something like a large hall with a patterned ceiling where you're going to have to move the ghast every so often whenever you exceed your reach. Like you're building a pattern, you do the thing, and then you've got to move the ghast. So I'd imagine some pre-planning would be involved in terms of like getting the ghast to face the right way. So you're going to be traveling like the length of the hall perhaps. And whenever you've done with your reach, you then have to get on the ghast and move it forward like a couple of blocks and then get off and stand on it and do the thing again. And while we have had an increase in reach over the last few years, and that'll make that a little bit easier, I still think that there's going to be a lot of repetition there. In the same way that scaffolding has a limit on its horizontal reach. Like a lot of times you see people get up there with scaffolding and then immediately start using dirt because they can go for miles, to scaffold horizontally. But it's easier to get vertical with scaffolding. I think that when you have the ghast positioned the right way, you won't have to like get on it, turn it, and then move it. So as long as it's been positioned in a solid way, then I think you'll be okay. A nice thing about the ghast that we've learned is that when you get off of it, it repositions itself to be parallel with the main 4 axes. So whichever way it's closest to facing when you get off, it's going to line itself up. So that's good. That means you're not going to be slowly drifting, in the X or the Z coordinates as you're going around decorating your ceiling. The thing that I'm curious about is, as you mentioned with a 3x3, holding shift when you're on the ghast. If that could keep you from falling off of it, great. If it doesn't, that's does it? Okay.
Yeah, like so from my gameplay with it is actually pretty solid at doing that. Like it's okay. Surprisingly robust as a fail safe. Yeah.
Because that's my main issue with scaffolding is that when I'm building with something like a trapdoor or doing something that requires me to hit shift to place a block, like on a barrel or something like that in a ceiling, scaffolding immediately you start sinking through it because shift is down when you're on scaffolding, right? What's the button that you press to mount the ghast? Is it shift as well? But you have to be looking down at it.
Yeah, you got to right click on it to mount it the way you would like a horse or whatever. But then I think you use shift to get off it, and you can still hold jump to travel vertically upwards, but to move vertically downwards, you've got to look down and hit forward. And so that's like the slightly fiddlier part of the control scheme.
Right.
But I think considering it's controlled with a WASD control scheme, it's not like Elytra where it's kind of like tank controls. You just got to point yourself in a direction and like steer. I think it's going to be a bit more usable because you can strafe with it. And I think that probably factored into why they chose that control scheme for it, because they knew people would want to use this for building, and it's one of its primary purposes is to have I'm imagining it like a cherry picker, like one of those kind of like personnel lifts that you'd have somebody like cleaning the windows on the outside of a really tall building with, or whatever, where like it maybe even if it's a little awkward to do this by yourself, like, you know, click on the ghast to move it and then get off and start building again. On multiplayer servers, you could have like a 2-person team building something. If it's a collaborative build that you're working on, you have one ghast driver and one player. From what I understand, if you have somebody standing up on the ghast, you can't move it. Like, even if somebody's still in the driver's seat, they can't shift it around underneath anybody who's standing on it. But then maybe that person can just be happy to like sit down as a passenger, just say like, okay, move me over 3 blocks to the right, and then the driver does that, and then the builder stands up, carries on building, sits down again, and the driver moves them again, and you end up with a bit more of a teamwork situation going on for a build.
Give it a fun back and forth. Be like, Aziz, light, instead of like pixel riffs forward.
Yeah, exactly.
Move us along.
Right. Yeah.
Bonus points for viewers that know what reference that is. I think that the idea of having a snowball and a stick, while funny, is not something that I would want. I think that it's probably going to be easy enough, like you said, to mount the ghast, move it to where you want it to go, get off it again, and walk around and do the things that you need to do without having the need to have one more thing in your inventory. Because I know that if I'm up there doing something, chances are I'm building something detailed, and I'm almost always operating at the edge of my inventory anyway. So to have one more tool that I have to carry with me to lure the ghast around, I would rather just, even if it was painful comparatively, I would rather be able to just sit on the ghast and move it and then stand up again than have to have a fishing rod and a snowball with me to handle that. Funny, like still a funny idea, but not I think very practical in Minecraft.
I agree, because the amount of times I've been riding, like whether it's riding a pig with a carrot on a stick or riding a strider, I think more recently with a warped fungus on a stick, I find that as soon as that leaves your hand, the mob is doing something you don't want it to do. And while ghasts seem to be the opposite, like they will stand perfectly, they'll hover perfectly still unless you start riding them, at which point they become under your control. I feel like adding in more organic movement like that is one of the things that makes mobs more difficult to work with. And so it's one of those things where tempting them with snowballs to get them to come down to you is a useful mechanic, but if they're kind of hovering in the distance a little bit outside of that detection range, it just becomes a little bit more irritating, and so you want to limit them doing that as little as possible. And I think the snowball on a stick idea sort of has this notion of a bit more freedom of movement for the ghast in the background if it's not being led by that, which in turn I think would make the Happy Ghast worse as an experience. So there's a bit of give and take involved there, but I'm pretty confident that they've got it dialed. Hopefully Donaraf gets a bit more hands-on time with the Happy Ghast, at which point it might become a bit more intuitive. Anyway.
This was a slightly older email too, so there might have been some developments since then that came in with the snapshots that might have answered some of Donaraf's questions, but it was still a fun conversation to have. And one thing I do like about the idea of luring a Happy Ghast, though, is like any kind of automation. So like, as an example, if a Happy Ghast was lured towards water, like a block of water, and you could like hide and unhide that, it would be cool to kind of like unhide the water, have the Happy Ghast come over to one side of the room, hide the water and reveal water on another side of the room, and have the Happy Ghast automatically go to the other side without having to have anybody on it. That could be kind of fun. But I don't know how and where they would do that, and what, I guess a snow block could be something, or a cauldron full of snow maybe. I just feel like if they had it on theme, then it would make sense with like the snowballs, but it would be fun to kind of see what that could be used for, I think.
That'd be great for like moving platform puzzles and that kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
That's the idea, yeah, for sure. Well, we're going to move on to the next email. This comes from Occidental Avian with the subject of a forgotten experiment. Hi Pix and Joel, the recent addition of the new cartographer village maps to the Snapshot, pulling elements from the trading rebalance, reminded me of another set of experimental snapshots I'd like to see make a comeback, the combat tests. Given that a lot of recent changes have been tested using the experimental features data packs such as bundles, the trading rebalance, minecart improvements, and redstone experiments, I'd love to see the return of these combat tests for modern versions of the game, especially because the last combat test was released 5 years ago in 1.16.2. Occidental Avian did not die because they had a stack of 16 healing potions in their hotbar.
I think you're going to get your wish. I don't necessarily think you're going to see it all in one go. I don't think there's going to be a combat experimental feature, but much like the changes to the cartographer, I think you're going to start to see little bits of change to combat or combat-related mechanics in the snapshots. I think just last week is a good example. We saw some small adjustments to how projectiles like arrows behave in Minecraft, and while a very specific change, that is part of what would be a larger combat adjustment, right? And I think that's the kind of way you might see perhaps some of the things that they've learned from the combat changes and the combat tests that they were proposing, and then are now implementing in smaller chunks and things that we just know worked. So in a way, it's good because if they've learned something that's functional or beneficial, it's not being held back by waiting for a combat update. It's like, oh no, we can just change projectiles now. We don't have to wait for the other things we were talking about in combat if they were to be implemented, for them to be implemented. I think that's a good change.
Yeah, I'm looking through the Minecraft wiki article about it, and there are a lot of things here that I think sound like good ideas, and a lot of them that sound like bad ideas, and that's part of the reason for the testing. Like, I think the changes to attack cooldown were a little bit too complex, and some meant that you couldn't attack at all until your weapon's cooldown had at least reached like 100%, and it was back to normal. And then you got additional charge on top of that, hitting 200% if you wanted to, like, get an additional block's worth of reach and things like that. And so that there are a few mechanics that felt less intuitive. You just sort of had to know about them if you wanted to take better advantage of them. And it made using tools and weapons a bit more inconsistent, which I think consistency is key when you aren't communicating a great deal of stuff through text. I think it's nice to know that while there is nuance to these mechanics, they're at least as straightforward as they can possibly be if you're feeling them out rather than being told how they work. There are a few things that I would still really love from the combat changes as individual features, and like you said, Joel, I think they can be drip-fed into snapshots in a way that means we don't have to playtest absolutely everything about a combat rebalance, because they're not the biggest effect on combat in general. Like, if you're changing the way damage is distributed amongst different weapons, if you're changing the way like attack reach works and blocking works, then yeah, some of those things I think have to go hand in hand, just because that way incremental changes could maybe just lead to power creep and make players more powerful or feel like too much of a nerf by the time that every feature was tested. But things like stackable potions and snowballs really don't feel like they are going to be that much of a rebalance in PvP. Like, I think 16 snowballs is going to do just as much damage as having 64 snowballs in an environment like Sky Wars, let's say, where knockback is really one of the things that becomes the most deadly. And I think if somebody's throwing 16 snowballs at you, if they haven't hit you by the end of 16, they're not going to do much more with 4 times that amount. But then for survival builders, having the ability to stack 64 snowballs would be amazing for gathering materials, considering how much space snow layers take up as well. Like, there's so many different mathematical kind of issues that would be solved by being able to store more snow that way. And like, there's a few other things. I think stackable potions, you know, there's been precedent set for them by things like ominous bottles being stackable, honey bottles being stackable. I think it would help a lot with inventory management to have water bottles be stackable, even for things like mud makers and things like that, right? If you have a machine that's constantly spitting water onto dirt blocks to turn them into mud, then having that machine filled up with individual bottles of water is kind of a pain and mechanically gets a little bit tricky to work around. So I think having those be stackable would be great. There's a few other bits and pieces like the changes to arrow cooldown so that multiple projectiles can hit a target and there's no sort of invulnerability window that you get to damage if you're hit by an arrow. That's a double-edged sword, because if you're surrounded by skeletons or pillagers and that's affecting the player, that doesn't feel so good. But it feels very cool to walk up to a Ravager with like a multi-shot crossbow loaded up with arrows of harming and be able to one-shot a Ravager that way. Like, that's how they can do it on Bedrock Edition, I believe, right now, unless they've reverted that change. But there's stuff like that that's really fun about the combat rebalance. And initially, Tridents were going to work a little closer to how they do in Bedrock Edition as well, where it's not just aquatic mobs that they're good against, it's mobs that are in water or even in the rain. Tridents with Impaling become a lot more effective than they do the rest of the time. And especially because right now the only hostile mob that Tridents are actually effective against is Guardians. Even the Drowned don't count as an aquatic mob because they are undead, and so Tridents are no more effective against them than they are against any other zombie. So I think there's a few things like that I would love to bring back from the combat tests, and a lot of it, frankly, has to do with parity with Bedrock Edition now. But I think there are some things where, while combat can be rebalanced, I think a lot of people are now used to the way combat works in this version. Even within the PvP community, I don't hear about that many people who are still sticklers for version 1.8 before the current combat came into effect. So I don't know for certain if people are itching for a combat update in the way that they were ages ago, but I do think some of those things deserve re-airing as experimental features.
Yeah, I'm with you on the stacking of certain items. I just went through this on the weekend when all of the updates that I wanted to do to my shulker boxes that cost levels required me to go get more levels. And with the switch to 1.21.5, my gold farm is no longer the easiest way to get levels. I have to go to the Ender in the end. And very quickly was overwhelmed by the amount of Ender pearls just kind of floating around. And I've stored some. We've stored more than we're ever going to need, but then they're just more and more being filled up in the chests because like you end up with them in your inventory as you're standing there with, smacking Enderman with a sword. And with the discussion on stream was like, it would be really cool if these stacked higher, or if we could condense them down into something like in the same way that a nether wart block, works. It would be great to have an extra block of texture in Minecraft, the Ender block, whatever that looks like, And I feel like with snowballs and bottles, I mean, obviously you don't want a bottle block, but like I like the idea of getting some of those things into higher stacks, even just to have potions stacked to 16. Like, I'm assuming that the idea behind having some things stacked to 16 or not stackable at all is to try to not make the game too easy. Going into the nether with 2 stacks of fire resistance potions is a lot easier than going in with a shulker box where you can only have the 24 with you. Or 20, 24, 30. I can't
it's
remember
27, I think, for a standard shulker box. But even
then,
it's
9 by 3, right? It's 9 by 3.
But it's not a whole lot still. And I think there's a bit of give and take there. It's like, how much effort does it really take to go and brew a couple of extra fire resistance potions? I don't think anyone's going to need more than a shulker box worth of fire resistance unless they're working in the nether for a really extended period of time. And the game there is not necessarily, do I have enough fire resistance potions? It's, do I remember to drink my fire resistance potion when the timer is up? And after that, there's really no sort of benefit to gamifying, the amount of capacity players can bring with them. I think the vast majority of the cases in which those would be a problem would be in really specific edge case PvP scenarios where people are throwing, potions of harming, and so they can't spam them as much, maybe. But then, stacking to 16, I still think feels like a good compromise, or having specific stack sizes or something. And I believe that's still possible now through data packs. Like, you can alter stack sizes for things like snowballs if you want to customize that stuff now, but the hard-coded stack limits don't really make as much sense to me as they used to. So, yeah, I think there's room for change there, and I think it's nice that those get brought up in the context of the combat rebalance, because there's precedent for Mojang playing around with these mechanics before, so it seems like something they might consider. Moving on to our main discussion for this week, we're going to talk about vibrant visuals some more, since we had a discussion suggested by an email that came in from Zing. So we're thinking about vibrant visuals and whether they are just incremental or fully revolutionary. And Joel is going to read this email for us.
So the subject of the email is precisely what Pix just laid out. Good day. Now that Vibrant Visuals is released in a stable experiment in the game, I turned it on my server, and our first impressions are that it's an incremental update overall, and that's a good thing. Rather than being a revolutionary experience, this feels like how I always saw Minecraft in my mind and how my friends did too. This also means that 16x16 custom textures which haven't been updated to Vibrant Visuals Shine can still be used quite smoothly. That said, I can't help but wonder what a more dramatic change would have looked like. What do you think? Is it more tame? Is a more tame update the right move for the future? Zing was blinded by the sun and could no longer write this letter. Zing also included a couple of screenshots that we'll have in our live chat as well as in our show notes at thespawnchunks.com this week, showcasing some of the, vibrant visual basics, but then also their idea of really pushing vibrant visuals to something a little bit more extreme, illustrating like which one might be better. And I'm going to jump right in and say that I think that an incremental change is a solid one. I think that Mojang has to try to appeal to a very broad audience, some of whom will likely not use vibrant visuals at all. They either won't know about them, they won't care about them, or they won't like them because it's not their nostalgic Minecraft. Like, it doesn't look like the Minecraft they know or grew up with or whatever their experience is. I'm looking forward to them. I'm hoping that they look good. But if they don't, I could easily see myself turning them off and turning back on shaders in Java Edition. So we'll have to see how that goes. But I do think that pushing things to the extremes as far as rendering goes is something that Mojang is probably going to leave up to either data pack authors or modders that might be able to take vibrant visuals once in the game and take them that step farther, much the same way that shader packs do now for Java Edition. I don't know what controls might be available for map makers for the Minecraft Marketplace, but I really feel like Mojang is more than likely going to give a good but fairly incremental basic experience, and then it will be up to players to take it to the next level, which I think is akin to Minecraft. Like, that's kind of the spirit of the whole game, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I totally agree. I think an incremental change, while obviously disappointing for some, is just going to have a much broader appeal, a much broader player base, because it's going to be compatible with so many older devices as well. I think while RTX was the extreme change that maybe our correspondent here is after, it was only available to a very small subset of the player base just because it was hardware restricted. And I think pushing things to extremes is going to alienate players who are on older devices. Very easy to completely rule out console players in general unless you're developing for the cutting edge, more recent console market, which, you know, there are still some people who are out there playing on like Xbox Ones and PS4s and having a fantastic time with Minecraft as it is. So the fact that vibrant visuals might be available to those players as well as the PS5 owners out there, and obviously folks who play on PC with lower end and higher end hardware, I think it just democratizes it almost. It makes it available to everybody in a way that's satisfying and makes sure everybody's experience can be similar. I think taking the more hyper-realistic approach to things and kind of pushing it in that direction feels a little incongruous to what Minecraft is, like Joel was saying. I think it reminds me a little of the photorealistic resource packs that do nothing to change the 3D shape of the mobs or blocks, and as a result, it looks like you've layered a flat photograph over, you know, a boxy cow, you know? I think that's the kind of stuff that you get into that territory when you hyper-realize Minecraft's lighting, but don't do anything to change gameplay. And while gameplay could change over time to adapt to vibrant visuals, we're very used to the way gameplay already is in Minecraft, and there are plenty of survival games which take a more realistic approach to environment design along with a more realistic approach to lighting. You think about the Ark Survival Evolved and those kind of things where like the mechanics of it are tied in with the visual style of the game, so it all feels a bit more natural. Whereas this, especially with things like pixelated shadows, it feels more like it originates from the same world as the Minecraft blocky landscape.
Yeah, I think pushing Minecraft visuals and rendering to extremes breaks the immersion because it conflicts with the simplistic geometry and thus the charm. And I would much rather be in a well lit, appropriately styled, cartoony Minecraft world than a hyper realistic one.
Yeah.
I draw a parallel to something like a Pixar movie. Well, they do very well sometimes with like water rendering or fire rendering and effects in those movies. A lot of the other stuff is still very much cartoony because otherwise it doesn't really jive. Like glass, they want it to look like glass, but it can't look like super realistic because then it starts to like break the immersion. Same thing with plants. I think would be a really good example is that you can't have a super realistic tree in a Pixar movie. Like it still has to look like an animated tree. And I
Hmm.
think that's one of the good examples I think in Minecraft is water and like waving foliage in shader packs. Uh, I usually turn off the waving water or turn it down to a point where it's really subtle. And I always want the Minecraft texture overlaid on the water surface. Realistic water rendering in Minecraft just looks like a model of Minecraft holding water. Like it doesn't feel
Hmm.
like it's the same world. And I
Yeah.
much prefer that kind of immersion where things are the same visually. And I do think, and I agree with Zing here, that vibrant visuals from what I've seen so far, even though I do have a couple of grievances, does make Minecraft look like I want it to in my head, right? I
Hmm.
want this stuff to look 3D. I want it to have shadows. I want to be immersed in the world. And I think that when you have light behaving the right way in Minecraft, that really helps. Early on, when I started on the Citadel, I had this really simple shader pack, and all it did was just give shadows to stuff. It really didn't have any light temperature changes, no waving objects. Like all it really did was just add like a little bit of a cast shadow to things. And that alone really brought things to the next level for me on just a basic level. And that was back because I was running on like a 13-inch MacBook Pro and like I didn't have a lot of extra resources hardware wise to run shaders. So I thought it was really, really cool. And I think that as Vibrant Visuals develops farther, and we see what they're doing, I think that it will add the kind of stuff to Minecraft that, as Zing mentioned, people have been imagining for a very long time, or people have liked about shaders, but then don't use shaders because they often have to turn off a bunch of stuff, or it gets overwhelming with the shaders just try to do everything all at once. I do find that's very frustrating with shaders, is that you get a shader pack that looks good, but then you're quickly researching online, well, I saw this in so and so's video, but it doesn't look the same out of the box because everything out of the box is just on. And so you have to go through and like turn off all the things that you find too extreme or temperature things and lighting things. And I find that, that kind of stuff is tedious with shaders. So I think that with Mojang going for, I don't want to say low hanging fruit, but going for a more simplistic approach or a more um an approach that's more in line with the Minecraft values and the charm of the game, I think will be more appealing to a broader player base. And I think that it'll be beneficial if they give us some sort of toggle. Like, I hope they go beyond on or off. I hope at minimum we have like a low, medium, high, sort of deal.
Hmm.
Or even into more specific controls like, do you want the reflections in the water? Yes or no? Do you want the pixelated shadows? Yes or no? Sometimes that's going to be great for performance. Like if somebody's got a slower computer for Java Edition and they want to be able to dial things back, great. But also it would be great for people that just like, yeah, I like this, but I really don't like the reflections, but I really want all the shadows around my cabin. So like you could turn one on and one off, and I think that that could be good. I mean, ideally both, because some people are not going to want to noodle with all the settings. I do find that that's overwhelming on shaders. I think shaders are way more complicated than what visuals will be as far as controls go. But I think that if you were able to say like, yeah, you know what, I'm going to turn off the water reflections and I want my stuff on like medium, and that's going to be my happy spot. Great, two settings, you're done. And I think that there's probably going to be some work and hopefully some player feedback in terms of like what they're going to do in terms of options for players for both aesthetics and accessibility, because some people they might just not like it at all, or it might be hard to look at. Some things might provide, cause dizziness or nausea, like that kind of stuff. So I'm curious to see where they're going to go with it.
Yeah, customizability is going to be the key to getting the most broad sort of enjoyment and positivity out of this, I think. Like there's already stuff like particles in the game, for example, have that kind of minimal medium full kind of setting, right? Like they've got a little bit more of a three-way toggle on that, which I think could favor vibrant visuals as well. I think even right now with like fast, fancy, and fabulous graphics settings in Java, like that's the same kind of thing where you can tailor it a little bit more to your system requirements. It's not going to automatically adapt to whatever your computer is running on. You have to set some of that stuff and dial it in a little bit. And that's sometimes a bit of a tricky prospect, especially if you're running older hardware. But I think it's also vital for players with a range of systems to get the most out of it. And we're looking from this from a very like Java-centric position as well. I think if you're playing on Bedrock Edition, provided you're not just playing on PC, a lot of that stuff is going to be more or less guaranteed for you, so you won't need the granularity there. But I think Java Edition players expect or at least want that kind of level of control, and I think players who are playing Bedrock on PC will also want a bit of that fine-tuned level of control. In a similar way to when I was playing Minecraft RTX, it was clear that there were some ways you could push it and some ways that you couldn't. Like, you couldn't set your render distance above, I think, 32 chunks, which for Bedrock Edition at the time was about 2/3 or 1/3 of what it was capable of, and you were missing the last 2/3 because you could go up to like 96 chunk render distances and beyond. But I think it still at least gave you an idea of like there are some limitations here. Like I found my comfort zone around 20 chunks, which is already more than I play with on Java Edition most of the time anyway. So there's still like a little bit of give and take there. But yeah, I think ultimately, to go back to the question here, I think an incremental update makes the most sense rather than pushing things to the extreme, because there's time to gather feedback from players, there's time to understand what system requirements are. There's also time to allow technology itself to move forward and for the benchmark to change for what the average person's system is, so that if they want to add some stuff in the future, if they want to make it a bit more robust, have a broader range of effects that are available, create more realistic reflections, that kind of stuff, then they allow time for technology to move forward and for players to get hold of that before they make any big sweeping changes that are maybe going to alienate some of the people with older hardware.
And the advantage to Minecraft there is that it's not the latest, greatest, highest fidelity graphical game. And so players don't have high expectations like they would from a new Call of Duty or a new Forza, or even something like a new extraction shooter or something like that. Even if it was a cartoony game, like you'd still want certain renderings to happen at a level with other modern games. And I think that with Minecraft, they've got the advantage of being as old as they are. Now that it's what 17, 15, 16 years old. 16
Yeah,
years old.
it was just 16 in May. Yeah.
In May, yeah. And I think that for me, like, it's when you go to the extremes and you get away from the core of what the Minecraft art direction is, that's when my eyes roll. And it's something where my, I guess, reservations on vibrant visuals are that I've seen some screenshots where even the grass looks a little plasticky. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know why the grass blocks are reflective. Like, I really don't feel like they should be. And so I'm hoping that we have some control over that, or at least the feedback from players is heard, in that, hopefully enough people that don't like that will voice it. Because while I think it's cool to have like an iron block look metallic or a lapis block look reflective, like that's cool. Redstone block glowing, also cool. But I don't necessarily need everything to be a shiny render, because then everything just starts to look the same. I don't want my Minecraft world to look like Lego. I have Lego for that, and I think that's something that I hope that they can avoid. Case in point with the samples that Zing sent in, the wildflowers in one of the rendered shots, they look like little metal flowers because they're so reflective, right? It doesn't look like a plant. It looks like a model or something else. And the other extreme shot is a bunch of stained glass with different textures they're sat on lights, and so the light being cast into the walls is respective of the blue, purple, and green lights that were in or glass that's in the shot. And while I like the cast of the light, and I think that looks cool, the textures on the glass are just so different. They're at angles. They're very realistic. In some cases, they look more like ice blocks than they do glass blocks. So like to me, it doesn't feel like the only thing giving away that it's Minecraft is the textures in the background and the fact that everything's a cube. But if those blocks were doing the exact same thing with the default Minecraft texture on them for stained glass, I think that's great. I think that's fine. I mean, I personally actually, we talked about this on stream on the weekend. I actually have a different stained glass texture. I removed the little dashed lines from it. Like I don't like the little dashed lines. And I have a 32 by 32 stained glass texture instead of a 16 by 16. And the only other change that I've made is that the darker line that goes around the outside of a stained glass block, for me, it's thinner. It's half as thick as it is on vanilla. And I find that that's just enough for me to like still have that vanilla vibe, but kind of like my eye doesn't twitch when I look at it. They feel too chunky for me otherwise. I also have connected textures as a mod because I like having a nice big stained glass surface as opposed to a grid, you know? And so those are the things, but I mean, and the resource packs, those are the kind of things that you can change after the fact. That's got nothing to do with vibrant visuals, but yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing, you know, how they handle that, because you know, one of the things that's tricky with shaders is that some things emit very differently than you'd expect them to. I was surprised when I was labeling my shulker boxes and I brought out some warped fungi, you know, or hyphae to place and build some chairs and stuff like that. And the warped hyphae was like neon bright, like the red veins in it were like lit up. I was like, oh, I didn't expect that. And it's like, that's cool and all, but if I had used that in a build as like a background texture or something like that, I wouldn't necessarily have anticipated that to glow. And so I didn't dig into it because I just thought, well, cool, I'll just, if I needed to tweak that settings later, I can check it out. But I didn't drill into the settings in the shader pack to know whether that specifically was something I wanted to turn off. Something that's a positive change in the shader pack is that I can use glow lichen, which I've done a number of times in the middle of a road or hidden underneath a stair to cover up like a spawning space that I didn't want to have a surprise creeper show up at me. And previously I wasn't using glow lichen, even though I thought it was a really cool block, because with shaders on, it lit up like a Christmas tree light. And in my new shaders, the complementary reimagined, it doesn't. And I thought, sweet. So now I can use it more often. So having those kind of granular controls in your resource pack with vibrant visuals, I think would be really, really cool, especially if you can easily make that accessible for players to get into and kind of like tweak. Because I would love for like redstone ore blocks to glow a little bit more, or cast light in the world. Torches in your hand, casting light is a fun thing. So it would be really fun to see what happens. And I don't think we've had any literature or articles noting specifically that, you know, texture packs will be able to interact with vibrant visuals in terms of like how it's reacting to it, right?
Yeah, the article on Vibrant Visuals, when they introduced it right after they were announced at Minecraft Live, did say, this is quote, we're actively working on Vibrant Visuals for Minecraft Java Edition, and our goal is to bring it to the game in a way that serves not only our players, but also our modders and resource pack creators. So I think, similarly to how they gave some of the control over Minecraft RTX's emissive and reflective surfaces to resource pack creators, it will be possible to do something similar with Vibrant Visuals. And in Zing's email, they did say 16 by 16 custom textures which haven't yet been updated for Vibrant Visuals Shine can still be used quite smoothly. So you can apply the lighting and shadows to the environment, but unless a texture is told to be emissive or reflective, it's not inherently going to be. Minecraft is not just going to randomly distribute those or have hidden values behind the scenes for like how shiny grass blocks are if you've changed the texture of them using like Faithful 32x or something like that, right? So I do think there's going to be some measure of control that players have over that, but it might be in the resource pack you're using and not in the like video settings menu, for example. But I think it's reasonable to assume that resource pack creators will be able to specify how textures appear. And if you want to like retexture your stained glass or retexture, let's say, glazed terracotta to look like a variety of metallic looking blocks of different colors, that might at least be possible and still allow for the same kind of reflectivity that they've given copper blocks and iron blocks and stuff by default in the Vibrant Visuals resource pack.
I hope it arrives in time for me moving to my sci-fi build zone, because I am 100% giving myself a lightsaber if that's the case.
Sure, yeah. There's definitely some stuff that I think people will expect from shaders, like dynamic lighting and whatnot, that like it remains to be seen whether that's part of their vision for Vibrant Visuals. But I think the main thing, and this is something I keep coming back to with Vibrant Visuals, the main thing to remember is that this is a sort of a Mojang-owned project in a way that Minecraft RTX was more of a collaborative thing with NVIDIA. This is something they're developing in-house with their visuals team, with like the folks who work on the rendering code. So this is something we're going to be seeing iterations on and support for the foreseeable future, rather than it just being a one-off thing that's designed to sell a new image of Minecraft that may not be sustainable. And I think that's the fascinating thing about it. So that's something we'll continue to report on, hopefully for years to come. For now, we're going to wrap up this episode of the show there. So thank you so much for watching this episode of The Spawn Chunks. You can find more information about our show and links to some of the stuff that we've talked about today over at thespawnchunks.com. The music for the show is composed by me. The Spawn Chunks is proud as ever to be a listener-supported podcast. We get all of the support for the show from our patrons on Patreon. And if you're enjoying the show and want to get some value out of it, consider putting some value back in. Patreon.com/thespawnchunks is the place to go if you want to join our community. Pledging at any of the paid tiers gets you an invite to our patrons-only Discord chat. You can listen to the show live when we record it in Discord every Monday. We also have monthly and quarterly hangouts where you can join to share what you've been up to in Minecraft and get the behind-the-scenes facts and figures of how the podcast is performing. We currently have 288 patrons, which is an increase of 1 from last week. We'd love to continue adding to that as we roll into June. Special thanks go out to our content engineer patrons, Hunter555, Jumbo Sale, Mindtrip Media, That Penguin Dude, Party Voyager, and Yitz. Thank you all for your support on this episode.
Sharing the podcast with your friends is the easiest way to support the show. You can find us at The Spawn Chunks on all of your favorite social media. We arrive with new episodes every Monday on your favorite podcasting platforms. There is a video version on YouTube as well as on Spotify. And you can also find the show notes at thespawnchunks.com. Email the show at spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. The RSS feed is on the website as well. And you can also find the patron-only RSS feed on the Patreon page. And that's where the render distance exists. It is the extended version of the podcast.
My name is Johnny, but online I go by Pixelriffs. You can find most of what I do at youtube.com/Pixelriffs, where the Minecraft Survival Guide is currently on hiatus, but I'm working on misadventures videos and still exploring the Craft Mine April Fool's update. I also stream 3 days a week on Twitch when I can, doing behind-the-scenes work for my YouTube series, currently running Lost Crypt over and over again for misadventures, but I also play other games from time to time. I'm the voice of the unofficial Hermitcraft recap too. You can find that through a quick YouTube search, and aside from that, I'm at Pixelriffs on both Blue Sky and Instagram. Joel, where can people find you online?
Pretty straightforward. I am Joel Duggan on all of the social media that matters, and Joel Duggan on Twitch, where I stream Tuesday through Saturday, covering everything from new games like Modulus, which I did a playtest on over the weekend. I also play Minecraft, obviously, and I build some Lego live on stream. And all of those VODs are available on Joel Duggan VODs on YouTube. And the last little bit of the retro radio from Lego, which if you've been paying attention, you might see behind me on the desk. That last VOD is going to go up tomorrow. So if you're curious about that build, if you're curious about other things I'm doing in Minecraft, it's all available. Very easy to find.
Thanks for visiting The Spawn Chunks. The world outside is infinite, and it's looking vibrant today.